Greetings, everybody. My name is Mandy Young. Mandy Young on most of my social media, but Mandy Robinson is my married name. I am an ecopsychologist and a psychologist. And my privileged journey over many decades as I've spent time with wild animals, tribal people, swimming with the dolphins, has been an understanding that nature has had a healing impact on me and discovering the impact of the healing power of nature. So tonight I would like to give you an example of how nature can be such an innovative way in terms of dealing with some of our most prevalent mental health issues. I think today it's a very unusual person who hasn't been through some kind of trauma or stress. And we don't talk about PTSD these days. We talk about complex PTSD. As a psychologist, I've recently worked with young people who, between the ages of 10 and 18, 25, who are self-harming, suicidal, not only because they've experienced their own trauma, but they also carry the trauma of their parents or their carers. So the trauma upon trauma upon trauma upon trauma. So in my life experience, when I was drawn to different species in nature, it was because something inside of me needed to heal. So for example, I was really drawn to the wild dogs because it always happened on a more intuitive, experiential, emotional level, and then I understood it with my head. But as I was drawn to the wild dogs and to spend time with them and to learn from them, I realized in my head that the reason for that was that when I was little, when I was about 10 years old, I went through a severe emotional neglect situation. I was sent to boarding school for a year. At 10 years old, away from my parents. No one visited. I had no relatives who visited, no friends who visited. It was a very isolating experience. The positive part was I really met God, who was my available parent, and had a powerful experience on a spiritual level and became a very pioneering, independent person. But it also had a lot of negative impacts. And as I observing the wild dogs, I realized that what I really missed out on was a sense of being family, a sense of being a part of a group. And early man and the early wild dogs only survived because they nurtured those kinship bonds. So tonight I want to draw together some neurological understandings, psychological understandings within our human society of dealing with trauma and stress, either from abuse, from neglect, from just being really overwhelmed. Maybe it could be a circumstantial situation, could have been a veteran in a war, could have been part of a natural disaster like a fire or an earthquake. And just to show that although elephants who also are part of believe in family and community, they've also experienced post-traumatic stress disorder. The book by Gay Bradshaw, Elephants on the Edge, What Animals Teach Us About Humanity, specifically spells that out. Some of the videos that I'm going to show you highlight that. So the way in which weekly wilderness webinars work is that we go on a vicarious safari, an online safari. I would love to take you on a real safari. And if you visit my website, the website details are above my head. You can see what's on offer there. But on a weekly basis, although we can't have the time or the finance to get on a real safari, we can go on a pseudo safari or a vicarious safari online. So the first video I'm going to show you is of the actual culling of elephants. It comes from a video that begins with natural deaths of elephants owing to droughts, and particularly at our time in our history due to climate change. compared to actually culling elephants. And then the second video is going to be a little bit about Gay Bradshaw's understandings of how not only humans, but elephants also experience post-traumatic stress disorder. I'd like to end off by just sharing some innovative ways we learn from nature and from the elephants about dealing with stress and trauma, but also that's also backed up by people who we know well in the industry who support those kinds of ways of intervention. So let's begin by seeing the first video. I need to give you a bit of warning. It's not pleasant to look at. It'll probably evoke some quite powerful emotions. But yeah, let's begin there. Okay, so very sad. And I think the ignorance of culling is that when you cull elephants, the elephants can communicate with each other up to 60 kilometers in good weather conditions. They feel the communication in their ears, big ears, and their feet, feel the vibration through their feet, so that what they hear is, we're getting killed, we're getting wiped out, breed more quickly. So elephants normally breed about every 2 years. If left to themselves and food resources are becoming limited, they can slow down the breeding process to every 5 to 7 years. But obviously, when they feel like they're being wiped out and culled and their survival is threatened, they will breed more quickly. So the culling exercise is just counterproductive. So very sad. But I think as you see that bit of footage, you can imagine not only the elephants, but you can imagine children in abusive situations, absolute terror of knowing that the abuse is coming, whether it's physical, sexual, emotional, and having no resources, just as vulnerable as the elephants to be able to protect themselves. So the trauma gets stored in the brain, and we'll talk a little bit later on how the brain functioning changes because of trauma. But I'd like to just introduce right now that when in 2002, I began observing elephants who'd had good community family experiences and elephants who had been culled in the late 1980s in Kruger. They were concerned that the elephant population was growing and that there wasn't enough resources for them. They were concerned that the elephants would wipe out vegetation that was valuable for other species. But again, there's a lot of ignorance because a lot of ungulate buck species eat plants even before they become trees. And if you just follow the natural cycles of nature, elephants clear the pathways for more savanna and grasslands, and then trees regrow and forests regrow again. So it's a cyclical nature, and it's a cyclical process in nature. And as humans, we try to manage that, and we're not very good at it. So when in 2002, I was observing a group of elephants who'd been brought into a reserve that had had elephants 100 years previously, but they'd been wiped out for agricultural reasons. There were wars in that area, and there were no elephants left. So 2 families of elephants arrived, and 15 months later, well, actually about 3 months later, several big bull elephants arrived. And then 15 months later, because some of those bull elephants had left the reserve because they were in must, they were looking for females to mate with, they crossed over to other reserves not too far away. One particular elephant went to a reserve that was 40 kilometers away. And owing to that interaction, 4 teenage females and 1 teenage male followed him back 15 months later. Now, those teenagers, the male and the female, the male and the 4 females, had experienced culling in their lifetimes. We called them the orphans because in the late 1980s, all the older elephants were culled and the smaller little ones were moved to reserves all over South Africa. We'll now pick up on a video footage with Gay Bradshaw. She came in on the back end of, or the repercussion end of that culling activity that took place in 1980. So let's hear a little bit what she has to say. Filled my mind. The image of the massacre of many seasons ago. Lost many, a few children, too young to be hunted for ivory, but fell in the hail of bullets. Smoke and sound from all around, and the calves ran screaming as they saw their mothers fall. I called to follow when we ran into the forest. I knew we were safe, and no one could find us. We spent 7
drank wine, ate and cried, some too frightened to curse. I remember what my mother and some of our people had taught me. I didn't tell my daughter this my family and all, and she children survived. I chose this passage from my book, some of them now, because I think it's entree to some experience of the elements like just violence and suffering, just trauma and sustained. So you were the first person to die. Can you tell us how this came about? Yeah, actually, it was something of. In the 1990s, I was involved in the National Science Foundation, scientists in South Africa to transportation, effects of transportation, African lives, all parts of Africa in South Africa. At the time, the purpose of transportation included a species attraction for tourists. At the time, apartheid just before revolution anticipated apartheid, and people start to come to South Africa. So during that time, prior, animals, including had extirpated. Life, and so all of these transportations and provincial parks, as well as private reserves. Now, not a translation was completed, but I arrived in South Africa, and the first thing I heard was that my park ranger just about rhinoceroses. And elephants. And time. See the dead and packed body of auntie that is next to me. And they were forced to survive on their own. Now, that's all traumatic. And in the sense of that, what we talk about is that they did not experience, it's not just what happened to them, it's what they lacked. So it turns out when you look at it from the perspective of the brain, from the perspective of psychology, these individual elephants had suffered a series of profound psychological traumas. They had witnessed their families being killed. They had experienced this horrific event. They were taken to another park where they had to live on their own. They did not have the normative, loving care of what we call a safe container of all the loving care of a family, the natal family, which is really the nucleus of an elephant civilization. It's the mother and the aunties and the siblings. Now, for young males, which these were young males who were the perpetrators as such, for killing all these rhinoceroses, and there were over 100 rhinoceroses and sexually assaulted. They were, when they're like about normally when they're 10, 12, 13, sometime around that time, they leave the natal family and they are brought into the graces of older male wolves, older male elephants, and they are mentored from teenagehood until their early 30s, which is when they go into musk, which is sexual maturity in their early 30s. So it wasn't the fact that these horrific events had happened to these young babies, but the fact that they did not experience the
it highlights there the trauma that the elephants went through. But if you are struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder yourself, you know what the trauma is like. You know what it's like to be in a war when the helicopters are coming down and the fire shots are going off, and you're not sure if you're going to alive. You might see some of your colleagues shot in front of you, people you've made very strong, close bonds with. And as with the little elephant calves, they saw their mothers, their aunts, their families killed. With young people that coaches and clients are dealing with, they've experienced trauma after trauma. And the consequence of trauma is that you repeat the trauma. Unless you know how to change your brain that has been so impacted by the trauma, your mental and your emotional and your physical well-being, you repeat the trauma. So here were these elephants, baby elephants who grew up, and now they were traumatizing rhinos, killing rhinos, sexually abusing rhinos, something that they would absolutely never, ever, ever do in a normal wildlife situation. So trauma begets trauma, and it is so important that we know how to process our trauma. So let's move into that arena a little bit. Trauma impacts our brains. So when we're little, and often trauma happens when we're little and when we're vulnerable, like the elephants were vulnerable, we don't have the resources to change our circumstances. We feel so abused, so disempowered, so absolutely unable to protect ourselves. And the most important thing, the primary brain that develops is the limbic system. And it's the system that's really geared towards survival and bonding and attachment, but also situated there is our fight or flight response. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. There's a new word now, fawn. So fawn is a response where you're constantly trying to please other people. So flight is obviously where you're trying to get away as much as you can. Fight is being very confrontational, as these elephants were being very confrontational with the rhinos. I've just been working with young people in a residential setup. They'd just been in situations where they'd been severely suicidal, severely self-harming, and their trauma was also resulting in so many different aspects, sometimes completely abusing and hitting out and kicking out at the people that were looking after them, because they just were repeating the trauma. They were repeating this excessive, overwhelming emotion in their brains. So with trauma, when trauma sticks us, keeps us stuck in that limbic system, in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn state. And even as adults, when other areas of our brains are more developed, like the neurocortical system, and we have ability to make different kind of reasoning choices, our limbic system has so taken over our brain and our functioning that it sabotages the resources that we have at our disposal. So very important with post-traumatic stress disorder is to begin, or complex PTSD, is to begin in a bodily somatic space. You've got to get back into your body and out of your mind. And there are a lot of great leaders in this particular arena that we have learned from. So we have Bessel van der Kolk, who writes the book Your Body Keeps the Score. We have Bruce Lipton, who offers a lot of hope when he writes The Biology of Belief. And he says that our cells are the membranes of our cells. Every single cell in our body is actually the brain of our body, because that membrane will allow the environment through to actually transform the cells of our body. The environment can be our actual physical environment, but can be our thoughts as our environment. So when we begin to think in a different way, it can actually change our cellular composition so that our dreams become our destiny, so that we don't remain stuck in post-traumatic stress responses. And then we have Coach Shazad, who's written a New York Times bestseller called Positive Intelligence, where he encourages us also, because what happens when our survival brain sabotages our whole brain functioning, neurologically, physically, emotionally, it creates a highway of response. We cannot do anything but deviate down that highway every time we are in hypervigilance, every time we disassociate, every time we disengage, every time we try to be a complete people pleaser. We go down that highway. And it's a repetition compulsive response. We keep doing the same thing over and over again, hoping that it will be a different result. But actually, because we don't do anything different and our brain is still sabotaging us, we just keep doing the same thing, causing the same drama, stuck in the same habits, the same addictions. So it's very important, says Coach Shazad, is that we get into a somatic state. So one of the things he suggests, but I would really strongly suggest to you, it's one of the things, just get into your body, get sensory. So one of the things you can do, rub your fingers together so hard that you can feel the ridges. And it kind of does two things. It distracts you. It distracts you from going down that highway. And then it enables you to start beginning to build a different neural pathway, because you begin to relax. Rub your fingers together. Rub your whole palms together. It'll start you to begin to relax enough to be able to get into a wiser part of your brain, a better functioning part of your brain, so that you can be empathetic. You can be sad for how you're feeling, what you've experienced, what life has been like. You can be curious. How can life be different? You can be a little bit more problem solving and positive, seeing, and I know this is asking a lot from people who've experienced really, really tough things in life, in really horrific ways. You can begin to see life and challenges as a gift for transformation, a gift for change, a gift for making your life something different. And I think that's one of the things nature and the elephants offer us. So what nature offers us is if you can get into nature, especially when you are wanting to get into that somatic, bodily, sensory space to begin to shift those neural pathways, nature is a great leveler. You're accepted for who you are. You're unconditionally accepted. You can be at ease. You can breathe. And it's harmonious. It's balanced. It's nurturing. And when it comes to stimulating all the senses, there's no better place to be. If we think about the elephants, some of the things that have helped them cope with their stress, their trauma, is that one very big thing is although they have great memories, they have learned to forgive. They don't hang on to the trauma, to the abuse. They have learned to forgive. And you know what forgiving does? It's not good for the perpetrator. The perpetrator doesn't even deserve for you to forgive them. But what it does is you can let go. You can let go of the tension, the anger, sadness, the depression, the disempowerment. You can let go. And when you let go, there's place for beautiful things to come in, loving things, nurturing things, connecting things. So that's one of the things we can learn from the elephants. The other thing we can learn is that they continue to relate. Now, I know when your brain is not functioning as it should and you're repeating different traumas, it's really hard to relate to people in a consistently good way. But as you begin to care about yourself and love yourself and value that beautiful body and every sensory experience that you have, you can begin to relate. And I think one of the things that helps with the elephants in terms of their recovery is their relationships with sister or brother elephants, their relationships back into families. And I think it's the same for you. It's so valuable to get back into a nurturing group, a family group. I know we could spend hours and hours and hours on the different things that we can do in terms of dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder and complex PTSD. I hope that I've shared a little bit with you tonight that will inspire you to be able to support yourself, or if you're a coach, be able to support your clients. If I can help further, if there is any other valuable information I can share with you, if I can take a journey alongside you as you begin to put these processes into operation, please make contact. If you go to my website, wildernessencountersafrica.com, you can find details how to connect with me. But simply my email address is exactly the same, wildernessencountersafrica@gmail.com. So I hope to hear from you. I hope that some of this has been helpful, and I look forward to meeting you again on our next weekly wilderness webinar. Have a great evening further.